Miguel, and he's from IBL AI. It's a company, and he's the CTO of it. He has very good background in AI, and I think hearing him might help us in our classrooms. So I'll let him do the talking from here. And he would like it to be interactive. So if you have questions, just raise your hands.
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, well, is this very loud or is this good? Yeah. All right. Okay. So thank you. So that's awesome. So, okay. First of all, thank you for having me here today. This is a massive honor. Right? I would love to attend a lecture the other way around, where I'm in the audience and then here, right here. But basically, we're a generative AI company. We're based in New York. We're family owned, and what we do is generative AI sort of platform like implementations, mainly for universities, but also for companies and so on, right? And this is a little bit of our background, right? So it's empowering educators with generative AI tools for teaching, for tutoring, right? For content creation, and for a bunch of other tasks that are administrative processes, right? So we wanted to, well, thank you, Cyrus, right, for the invitation, right, for coming here and talking a little bit about how this can be. So it's a combination of an intro and how this can be made more useful or sort of demystify some things, right? So if there is anything that you would like me to cover or explicitly mention, I would appreciate, I don't know, if you tell me, for example, right now, kind of what would you like to make sure is absolutely covered, just so this is, max useful for you. Is there any area around sort of generative AI, maybe that you've heard, maybe hype or maybe not hype, right, that you would like me to absolutely make sure to go into, or we just plow ahead normally and then you interrupt me, please, if you have any thought or any question or any observation? Yeah? Okay, cool. All right. So basically, it helps to talk about the motivation, right, for some of this stuff in the first place, okay, which is, let's say, AI in education, the way we think about it is, if is everybody being educated today, right, to the extent that we would like them to be educated, right? And if the answer is yes, okay, then anything that adds efficiency, like AI, well, is maybe a little bit, not concerning, right? But just to go right into it, it's basically a job killer, okay? Right? Because if everything is already all the objectives are already being met and the system gets more efficient, then okay, you need less parts to work the system, therefore, the job killer narrative, okay? So we don't really see it that way, right? The way we see it is, well, the problem is actually pretty bad, right? And this is just one example. So if you look at the test course in math, reading, and science, we work, for example, with the University of California. These guys, and there's a university where 10,000 students come in every year. 70% of the majors require calculus. 1,500 of those students have to go to remedial courses sometimes for 1 semester, sometimes for 3. There's not an abundance of TAs. In fact, there are less, right? And it's a real problem, right? You have a lot of students who are completely disserviced by the current system. And we say, okay, so what can happen here? Ideally, if we can say, okay, AI, and this is that classic paper from MIT, from the 2 sigma problem, right, from a few decades ago, right? But if you can have one-on-one tutoring, right, which you could do it through human TAs or not, but obviously there are economic costs there, then the outcomes radically improve. Okay, so if you have one-on-one tutoring, right, for each student, we're walking them through the material, then suddenly the motivation problem gets alleviated, and then the actual knowledge problem, basically filling the gaps for the student, also gets alleviated, right? But who's going to provide a single human instructor for each student? It's not really possible, okay? Obviously. So we see this problem, right? Things keep getting a little bit worse for a lot of students, unfortunately, right? And I don't know, there are all those kinds of narratives. That's not what this presentation is about, right? But some people are talking about COVID, some people are saying, oh, you know, the motivation, or kids are on TikTok, I don't know, right? There are many theories there, right? But the reality is that, you know, there is a problem that is not really being, you know, can't really be met, right, by the existing resources, right? Because you cannot, you know, just be having hundreds of students in the classroom, right, with no individual sort of support. Okay. The TAs, you know, there's that economic sort of reality of, well, on average, it seems as though the cost, right, for a TA maybe is between $2,000 and $3,000 a month. I don't know, obviously this cost varies, right? But the point is that you can also say, okay, well, we're gonna have an unlimited number of TAs either. Okay, so the problem is there's no real solution for the problem as of right now. Okay, so then you say, okay, so what can AI do, right? Like, especially generative AI, right? There are many kinds of AI, right? There's, you know, neural networks, but there's a bunch of other sort of systems that we can talk about, but today is specifically generative AI, right? And generative AI is basically this sort of what you've seen with ChatGPT and all these other systems, which is just predicting the next token. Okay, it's as if I spend the next, I don't know, 800 years of my life, right, reading the entire internet, and somehow I remember all of it, and you can ask me any question, and I can, you know, answer, you know, with tokens based on what I have read and what I have remembered. Okay, assuming I'm gonna live for 800 years, I'm gonna remember the whole internet, right? That's a little bit of what this is. Okay, so you have models, right? There's ChatGPT, of course, but now, thankfully, right, it's not 2023 anymore. Right now, there's basically an explosion of models. So a lot of these, you know, implementations and concerns that would be traced back to OpenAI maybe don't really apply so much anymore. Okay, so you have these, let's say, large language models, and we can talk about multimodal as well and so on, but they're effectively good at predicting the next token in a sequence, right? It's kind of like if I say, I love you so, what do you think I'm gonna say next? Probably much, right? Because you've heard that so many times, that is effectively how this is operating. And it's just because you know, this is sort of the next token that you would predict, I would say, right? And these large language models are effectively doing that, you know, obviously at an impressive level of scale. So you have these systems that just generate text based on, and we'll talk about sort of the building blocks of that, right? But based on sort of inputs that you feed into it, right? And you have, you know, to some extent, a fair amount of control over how this responds. Okay, there are obviously areas where you're dealing with, you know, so many billions of parameters, right? That you cannot, it's not deterministic, right? You cannot say, oh, I'm gonna ask it something and it's gonna respond this exactly always. No. Okay, it's not deterministic, and there is the problem of hallucination, which hallucination is basically saying these models saying something that you don't expect them to say. If you do want them to, like, hallucination is basically the opposite of creativity, right? If you wanted to operate like that, then you would say, oh, this is really creative. But if you want it to be creative in that moment, because maybe it's an application where you want to make stuff up, you're like, that's hallucinating. Okay, but these are two sides of the same coin. So sometimes it's overly creative, and you know, you have to implement some techniques to rein this in order to make it useful, right? Because it's very good at confidently saying something that may not be true. Okay, so I don't know. That's one concern, all right, or one sort of possible scenario, which I'm sure you've seen, right, with ChatGPT being the most famous system. Obviously, is sometimes, you know, you can ask it things and it will confidently reply. Whether that response is correct or not, well, that's another question. So that's one variable, right, that you can modify, and we'll talk about how, right? Then another variable is basically the cost, right? So there are many models. Okay, there are models, for example, like, you know, GPT-4, right, which is, you know, the best one from OpenAI right now, and then there are models like Llama 3, right, with a disparity in cost by more than an order of magnitude. Okay, so another reality is, okay, the cost sometimes is perceived as too expensive, right? But depending on the model, that may not actually be the case. Okay, so you can have, for example, GPT-4 charging you $30 for 1 million tokens. Okay, when we talk about tokens, by the way, you can imagine that 10 tokens is like 7 words. Right? It's not an exact metric, but roughly speaking. Okay, so if we talk about it costs $30 for a model to output 1 million tokens, okay, it costs $30 for a model to output, you know, 750,000 words or 700,000 words. That's one case. You have other cases where it can cost, $2, right? And that's the case with Llama 3, and we'll go into open source in a second. Okay, but where we are right now is we have sort of this generative AI models that have become way more democratized than they were a year ago. Maybe you saw this nice famous article, right, from, it was some senior person at Google, okay, and they wrote this thing pretty sort of anonymously because someone else could have been a little angry about this, right? But as OpenAI released this stuff, and then Google was, coming into it and so on, someone there is like, okay, well, we have no moat, and neither does OpenAI. Okay, moat, moat, I guess the business term, right, is if you're in a castle, right, and you have your little water around with your crocodiles, right, that's your moat. Okay, you want to have a moat, obviously, if you're OpenAI and if you're Google, but the reality is these large language models have been, thank God, right, but in a way overtaken by open source. Okay, there are specific applications where OpenAI, for example, dominates, of course, the state of the art. The absolute best models in terms of reasoning capabilities and so on are still right under OpenAI. This is a little bit of a debate, but not really. It's OpenAI. But for many applications, because depending on what you want these models to do, you could say, okay, well, I can stick with a much cheaper model. I can stick with a model that is 8 billion parameters instead of 50 or 100, and that translates into cost. Then you have possibilities. Okay, so everything that we're talking about with generative AI is not some overt advertisement for OpenAI or for Google or anything like that. Right? This is something that is widely distributed. Open source is, in fact, what we're seeing as the leader for academia. Okay, because you cannot be saying, as universities, we're going to be trusting OpenAI or any one company, right, with all of our students' data and all our expertise. That's kind of insane. So open source is really the main way to get this done. And today we're just gonna talk about how you can make use of these things and how you can control them for very specific use cases. Okay, but I just wanted to dispel at the very beginning the notion that, okay, well, this is a job killer. Don't think so. Right? Would be interested to hear your thoughts, right? But until the job is done, and the job being done means people are being educated to the extent that we want them to be educated, right? At the level that we want them to be educated, that's when the job is done. So far, job's very far from done. 2, that you have to have buy-in into any particular vendor, whether that be OpenAI or Google or anybody else, also not true, right? And 3, that it's expensive, okay? Because it's not, right? You have some models that are more expensive than others, right? But then you have the ability, right, to be able to operate pretty inexpensively as well. Okay, so that's basically the setup. And now we can, talk about specific use cases and how to rein it in. Is there any opposition to any of those claims? Or, yeah? Okay, sounds good, fair. So, yes?
Over time, would the economies of scale bring down the price of tokens?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have, if you see sort of these large language model providers, especially when they are operating in open source routes, right? So there is a company called Mistral, right? And they're French, okay? It's a French open source AI company. They're great, right? They released a model, okay? And they released it totally, open source and so on. And then they have some investors, right? So then the investors are like, well, you should be charging for this, right? Because, money. So they release basically a paid version of their model, but since it's open source, another company comes in, this one's called like Together Compute, and basically undercuts them by a factor of 1,000. Okay? Which is open source. Like why wouldn't it, right? And let me show you this, just because maybe if it's kind of illustrative, it's very cool. But if you see, I'm gonna show you two samples in pricing. Because I can tell you that the pricing and so on is nice, right? But if you see it, it's better, right? So you see, I'm gonna pull up 2, okay? And this is just in the span of I don't know, when did ChatGPT first come out, right? A little bit over, a year and a half ago, okay? If you see, when this first came out, when ChatGPT first came out, it was basically GPT 3.5, okay? Sorry, maybe you can see this. So GPT 3.5 is what we got in December, right? Like the last year. it wasn't even durable, okay? So it was a little bit worse, right? But GPT 3.5 came out, and then, a bunch of other stuff came. That's why OpenAI lowered this price by a factor of 100, because otherwise no one would still be using it. So this is one model, right? OpenAI then keeps saying, okay, well, let's release another model. You see this one, right? $15 per 1 million tokens. Okay, so when you look at the pricing units, right, for an LLM, you basically have the input and the output variables. Input is the messages that are coming in from the user. So if you say, hey, okay, if I literally send that message, like I have sent here, okay, I have sent 1 token, okay? My input has been 1 token, okay? So when you look at this, you say, so what's my price gonna be? Because they're not gonna be charging me, I don't know, 0.000 something, right? That's confusing. So they're gonna say, okay, well, $5 for 1 million tokens. And $15 per 1 million output tokens, okay? An output token is basically this, right? So here we got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, basically, 8 to 10 tokens, yeah. So that's sort of when we talk about the pricing units, we say, okay, here's the input cost, here's the output cost. You look at this one, right? So input is gonna be $5, output is gonna be 15. Okay, so this is OpenAI's best thing right now. You have this other company coming in, and look at these prices, okay? So it's just 5 cents and 8 cents, okay? Versus, I put them side by side to make this less confusing, right? But 5 cents and 8 cents compared to this, okay? And it's not even, this is also not an advertisement for Grok, okay? Right, but this is just saying that there's so much competition, and you look at Google, for example, right? So Google came out with Gemini, another model, right? That they are, they're actually making like quite affordable as well, right? So you see this ecosystem of large language model providers, where in December of 2022, it was OpenAI, and everyone was like, well, I wonder if anyone's gonna catch up to them. Okay, plot twist, they have. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just pointing out the context length, so I don't think you can be linear about these prices without talking about context, because
Fair.
we're dealing with 128K, which is, it's non-linear, context is not linear. So I think maybe if you can dig a little bit deeper into why this is so much less expensive, given that it's so much smaller context.
Okay, fair enough. So there are a couple of reasons as to why this is less expensive than that. So first, the context window, basically what that is if you want the language model to respond with your data. So let's just say you want it to respond with, let's say, I don't know, let's just say you have a textbook, okay? A textbook is a little bit of an ambitious example, right? But let's just say you have a body of text that is authoritative, right? Like that is absolutely correct. Like there is no deviation from anything that's in this piece of text, right? It could be whatever. When you want to ask the language model something, if you ask it point blank and you don't take into account your authoritative source of text, then you're kind of at its mercy, okay? You're at its mercy, then let's see what it responds. If you want it to be reined in a little bit more, right? As in you want it to say, okay, respond, but I have to do a better, I have to kind of make sure that the response is gonna at least be correct. I can say, and this is a technique, it's not really a hack, I can say to the language model, respond to this question using only information that you find in this source, okay? So you're like, all right, it's called RAG, right? That's the sort of the technique, it's fine, right? But it's a way, so I don't want to say it's a hack, because it's not really a hack, right? But it's a way to sort of coerce the LLM or lead the LLM into responding with data that you trust, right? Because in the event that you don't have any authoritative data, you could just, at the application layer, do something that says, okay, if you don't have any authoritative data about this, don't even bother responding. Okay, so for example, there's something that we do with Fordham University. For example, they're talking about their campus life. Okay, so they feed us all their authoritative data about their campus and all that. If a student asks something about, what's Fordham's policy on space travel, when Fordham has never written anything about space travel, right? You don't want the LM to just confidently make up an answer. So instead you say, okay, what is the authoritative piece of information that we have about Fordham's position on space travel? None. Therefore, we're not going to answer. Okay, so that authoritative piece of data is how you can think of let's say this user asking a question by providing that additional context, okay? It's like if I'm gonna ask you a question, I'm not just gonna ask you the question, I'm gonna say, answer this question using insert piece of data. How much data can you put into that insert piece of data block? Okay? And that's what's called the context window. So, this is another feature of some language models where you have maybe, I don't know, 1,000, or in this case, 8,000 tokens that you can put as part of the context. And you have other things like that could say, okay, well, let's have 128,000 tokens. If I can put more information as part of that context, then I can maybe throw in textbooks, I can throw in research papers, and my responses will get that much better. Okay, because you will be able to just cover a wider space. If I have a model, yeah.
Or, I'm sorry, just because this is maybe true for factual type stuff, but when we're talking about generative AI and creativity, then
Yeah.
what we're really talking about is sort of working within this, and then the larger the context window, now what you're doing is you're providing models to allow it to riff upon. I'm using riff.
Yeah,
But, and so I think there, really, contextuality allows these language models to better simulate
Yes.
something that is not based on fact only. So
Yes.
anyway, I'm
Yeah, no, that's right. Yes, exactly. You could say, as part of the I could say, for example, tell me a story about, today's morning walk in Brooklyn in the style of Shakespeare. To be very clear, these are all the Shakespeare books. Okay? So I'm asking it to do something creative. I'm not asking it to draw any factual information from the Shakespeare books, right? But I'm feeding them as part of the context. And if we want to look at context window, right, there is Google Gemini 2 million context, right? So these guys, one of the things that Google is like sort of priding itself on, because this is just, an arms race, right, from all these LLM providers. Some people are going to say, okay, well, I'm going to respond to you fastest. Other people are going to say, I'm going to respond to you for the least amount of money. Others say, I'm going to give you the largest context window, so you can just feed in textbooks. And, based on your application, you see, all right, cool, this is one option versus this is another. So this is one variable. The reason, just want to go into this, sort of the secondary reason as to why this is particularly cheaper, because it's another vector of like innovation for these companies, right? And basically comes down to the hardware. Okay, so these guys, Grok, have a hardware unit that's not a GPU, okay? The GPU, the typical NVIDIA GPUs that are used for video games and for AI, that's sort of the mainstream. Google has the TPUs, right? But let's just say the NVIDIA GPUs are kind of the most standard piece of hardware that allows for these applications. Well, these guys, Grok, say, okay, well, a GPU is very nice, right, for video games and for a bunch of applications, but if you refine that hardware to be specialized at one task, in this case, they came up with something called an LPU, okay? It's a language processing unit, and they say, let's just discard every part about the GPU that is not gonna be useful for language models, right? So they have a super specialized hardware that is cheaper to run, and this is one, when people talk about, well, NVIDIA has no competition and all these things, say, well, maybe there's, I don't know who the competition is from sort of a general purpose, right? But you definitely have people who are competing on smaller segments of that market. Okay, so if you're talking about what is the fastest way to churn out context from a language model, well, this hardware is, it's kind of nice, right? So if you say, tell me the capitals of all 50 states, okay, thanks guys, right? But all right, well, okay, I'll show you that in a second, right? But if you say,
It's because it's Google, they don't watch it.
that's true. Now it's like a personal thing, and we have to make this. Okay, I'll show you this after, right? But the point is that you just have these people are competing on a bunch of factors, right? Cost, speed. There are people who are also competing, and I think it's nice to talk about the competition because even if we're more interested in it from a sort of an instructional standpoint, it makes sense to say, okay, I'm gonna be spending my time learning about something that's just not gonna be some corporate product, okay? So obviously we have a company, so we are interested in knowing the competition, but even outside of that in academia, it's good to really drive home the point that there are a lot of people, like millions of people, like working on this kind of stuff, and it's not like being specialized. It's time spent on this, it's not like time spent learning, I don't know, Microsoft Office, all right, which like you're at the mercy of Microsoft. Like this is something like pretty standard. So, You have all these, anyway, you have all these variables. It would be nice to talk about the sort of the composition, right, of these things, basically what are being called AI agents, right? Because when this ChatGPT first came out, right, the conversation was around chatbots, okay? Chatbots are fine, right? But the next point in the conversation is agents, okay? And agents, in a way, are tasked with doing a little bit more work than a single chatbot, right? A chatbot is you write something, chatbot responds. An agent, in the ideal scenario, picks up a workflow, picks up your criteria for evaluating that workflow, performs the workflow, and then communicates the results back to you, okay? So that's sort of where the next part of the conversation would be. Are we good to go there? Okay, so agents basically are, this is also another thing where it's not a term that is owned by any one company or entity, right? If I don't know, there are probably thousands of people building agents. Okay, at this point, thousands of entities, probably millions of people at this point. So an agent basically says, okay, taking the core technology of a chatbot, how can we expand it, all right, to perform a task which, let's say in our case, in the context of education, maybe there are two, right, that are maybe the most common, right? One is helping a student understand a concept, and another one is maybe help to create content, okay? So those are the two most common applications that come up in education. Well, and obviously with all the necessary caveats, okay? Right, when you say, well, this is going to be it's going to be helping a student master a concept, as of right now, and possibly for a very long time, it's not going to do as great of a job, right, as somebody who is learning the field and empathetic and warm and all this stuff, right? But it helps, I don't know, for us, it helps to think about the context where a student doesn't have that opportunity, right? So we have, for example, universities where, you know, the tutoring center is open from 4 to 5 p.m., the person works until 9 p.m., no alternative for this person, okay? So in that context, it's helpful, right? Because it seems as though whenever we say it, there's a little bit of a trigger reaction. You're like, okay, well, I can obviously educate a student better. Yeah, of course, right? But there are some students who are they don't have that alternative at all, okay? And even if you go beyond the United States, the problem is even worse. So, these agents, you say, okay, well, what is it gonna have? So first, it has to have a brain, okay? And the brain is basically the reasoning engine. The reasoning engine is the language model, okay? So it's the same language model that's responding as a chatbot, okay? So whenever you ask it, you feed it some input tokens, right? We're having a conversation, and basically means I'm giving you input tokens, you're giving your output tokens. The conversation continues. When I give you some more input tokens, you give me some output tokens back. Okay, so you see that even a conversation between humans, right? It's just an exchange of tokens. So you have the token generation is responsible, it's done by the language model, okay? And you have different kinds of language models. You have language models that are specialized, even aside from the variables that we talked about earlier, you can have different language models that are trained to perform in a certain way. This is, for example, Salman Khan from Khan Academy. So this one, we kind of did it as a joke, but honestly, it's kind of interesting. So we trained a model on I don't know how many thousands of videos from this man, okay? To just teach concepts in his voice. And we did that by saying, okay, here's sort of the manner in which Salman Khan speaks. And now I'm gonna ask you a question, and I'm gonna expect a response that's gonna sound like him, okay? And we're not talking about audio to audio, but if you see here, you say, all right, so let's say you asked about the importance of photosynthesis, and you see this transcript that it generated, it sounds like him, right? So I'm sitting here in my backyard, and I'm looking at all the plants. This is how every single tutorial of his starts, right, with that personal experience. So you can have models that are fine-tuned, okay, to, let's say, answer in the style of Salman Khan, right? Or answer in your style, or answer more factually, or answer in another manner, right? Depending on the application, you could want that. And that's where choosing a language model comes into play, okay? You won't be able to So this is called fine-tuning a model, okay? And fine-tuning a model is basically like fine-tuning the brain, right? So I studied computer science, okay? My brain, let's say, is fine-tuned in a computer science manner, right? But I picked up information later on. I graduated a while ago, right? So obviously I learned some stuff after. That information that I picked up after is not in my fine-tuned model, right? But if you want to seek a computer science fine-tuned model, then you have some options, typically going to be from the open source community, versus if you want something for biology, you have, for example, Google or medicine. Google has a MedPalm model, right? So the MedPalm model is specialized in medical tasks. Okay, so you basically have multiple brains available. Okay, this one is just happens to be trained on medical stuff, and it's not going to respond like ChatGPT, right? If you ask it about some deep medical question, it's going to take into account all those caveats that you would want it to be taking account if you were delegating your health to this thing. Okay, so many kinds of large language models. These are basically the brains. Okay, and GPT-4 is maybe the most famous one. We saw this, from Google, a bunch of others, right? Open source is kind of where we are most comfortable, what we like to do the most, and that's where we have Llama 3. So Llama 3 right now, as of today, is like the most powerful open source model. Llama 3 comes from Meta, aka Facebook, right? Who was arguably a little bit behind in this whole AI stuff, right? Because maybe they were spending their time on VRs and whatnot, and many other things, right? But then they came out and they just released open source models that just perform insanely well. And they made them open source, which means that these guys like Grok, for example, that we saw, are able to take that open source model and then put it sort of in their own environment. So Llama 3 is, it's an open source model that often you will find fine-tuned for specific tasks. That's you choosing the brain of the agent, okay? Now, what are other things that the agents can have? So one is prompts. Okay, so prompts is basically like the instruction or the stated purpose of the agent. Okay, so you could have an agent that is trained on, let's talk about the Google, for example, The Google example with the medical stuff, right? The MedPalm LLM, right? It's a model that's trained on all this medical research. Okay, the system prompt is where you would convey the difference between a nurse at the hospital versus an administrator versus a surgeon, okay? In this case, let's just say they all have access to the same knowledge, right? But an administrator is maybe going to respond to things a little bit differently, right, than a nurse, right, than a surgeon or a PA, okay? Because it would make sense, right, for all these people to respond the same way. So in the system prompt is where you sort of give it the instruction. It's like if you're in ChatGPT and you wanted to help you, write some sort of material about the course, and the system prompt is kind of where you set the stage. Okay? It's like you're writing a course, or you're writing this piece of content about a course in this subject. Maybe here's the syllabus if you want to sort of drive things a little bit more. The system prompt is basically where you sort of set the stage, right? It's like don't respond to me with, anything about anything, right? Instead, respond to me sort of in this manner. And one format that these usually take is they'll start by saying, okay, let's say these are, for example, prompts that you wanted to run. Well, maybe you start out by saying, okay, you are a professor in data science. You are specialized in, Python, whatever, right? NumPy, whatever, right? And that's where you set the stage. That's the system prompt, okay? Then you have other things, which is basically a data set, okay? And the data set is where if we talked about driving the LLM or driving the models to respond with authoritative information. One way is you can put that in the context, okay? Which is basically answer this question using insert textbook here. Okay, but then you're limited by what is the context size of these models, right? Can the entire textbook fit in 100,000 words? Maybe. Or maybe the body is larger. Whenever you can't, let's just say you have way more information than you can possibly know what to do with, right? Let's say you're operating on a model with a context window of, let's say, 5,000 tokens, right? But you wanted to respond with like an encyclopedic level of knowledge. Okay, well, you're not gonna be able to shove that into the context, so you're gonna have to, get a little bit more clever with the algorithms, and you're gonna have to do something, well, this is called RAG, which is, okay, I told you that the entire authoritative source of knowledge comes from this encyclopedia, but considering that you cannot process the entire encyclopedia with every response, I'm gonna help you by saying, answer this question using only this chapter. Okay? So it's, you need some clever, yeah.
I used to dummy down answers to my students sometimes. Give me answers, you would speak to a PhD, give me answers, speak to a freshman with an A+ degree, give me answers, speaking to someone in high school who's a sophomore with C, they'll give me different levels, dumbing it down, but it was easy, plain language for them to understand the graph or logic concept.
Yeah, exactly. And you would determine that if at the system prompt model, right? So even if you have that knowledge, right, it's like you know everything, but in the system prompt model is sort of kind of exactly where you would sort of refine that content, sort of the way, the delivery of that. Yeah, for example, I mean, this is the example that everybody has seen, right? But write an email to a colleague, I don't know, complaining about something that they're doing, but make it seem nice, right? Like that's kind of where, where you would do this. That would never happen, of course, right? But so that's sort of like the system problem. And then there's this. It's a little bit of an emergent thing. It's kind of interesting, but basically you can give it tools, okay? And tools are basically API calls, okay? So maybe you wanna have an agent that is going to, I don't know, I mean, it's going to look at the current news, right? And send the students an email about how it maps to the content, okay? So you wanna have an agent that does that. That's conceivably kind of interesting. All right, so how do you know who told it what the news are, right? Because unless you provided that in the context, which is a manual effort, unless you copy paste it from the newspaper into the context, that's going to be a manual effort, and it's going to change constantly, and it's going to be a waste of time, right? So you want to say to the agent, okay, if you're going to be looking at the news and writing an email summarizing what in the news applies to our content, it would be very cool if this agent was able to call a search engine API to at least get those news, okay? So you want to equip that agent with the ability to call an API, right? And that's a tool. So this is where, even in ChatGPT, for example, you can go and you can say, okay, we're going to access information from the internet. Okay, cool. If we say, all right, so we want it to be able to web browse, right? To say, for example, look at this website, get this information, convey it some other way. You need an API for that. You could also have APIs that not only read data, but APIs that save data somewhere else. Okay, so you can feed this for, I don't know, if a student replies to an email and you wanted to just interpret the email and sort of store those results somewhere in the student system, then okay, you would equip the agent with a tool that will save that data as well, right? And the tools is basically, there's no real limit, right? As long as there's an API call for it, you can embed it into a tool, right? And then there are other services like Zapier that exist to sort of make that process a little bit easier, right? But if you can think of reading or writing data anywhere with APIs, then you can equip those agents with APIs. Suddenly, they're a little bit more useful. Okay, so this is where, the needle sort of continues to improve, right? So we started with these things as chatbots, okay? And then we started to equip them with things where, they can read and write data somewhere else, right? You can also, going further here, you can say, okay, so we're gonna have a schedule, right? And we're gonna have agents that are going to do something at a certain time, right? So we have one, for example, for student notifications, right? Where you say, okay, so at, let's say 9 a.m., you're gonna look for any sort of anomaly about the user, and you're gonna write a carefully drafted email for this user saying, hey, this is where you are, or, pick this up, or great job. It's something that is not really easy for us to program, right? Because the student could be in whatever state, but you basically let an agent do this kind of thing. And that's sort of where the conversation is right now. Okay, I know we are at the 45-minute mark, so very good. Right now, we're sort of so to summarize, sort of, I guess, where things are, is you have the ability, right, to deploy and command agents to perform tasks that are, you know, maybe not 400 level IQ, okay? Maybe it's just like 100 level IQ, okay? But those still can be, you know, quite useful, right? And you could say, okay, well, there are certain tasks as part of your workflows where, you know, they're redundant enough, right? This could pick it up, right? We have a university, for example, where they want to modernize some of their content, and it basically goes back to the what's in the news example, right? So we'll just make recommendations. Like, I'm gonna look through your content and I'm gonna map it, right, to other stuff that's being, you know, is coming out elsewhere. So for example, if you have, I don't know, a cybersecurity course, right, you wanna modernize it with examples of the latest things that have been hacked. Okay, right, like, there are a bunch of tasks that it can, you know, that it can help with. In terms of instruction, well, it can say, all right, well, what is this student's grade right now? And what is sort of a next possible question? These are not tasks that are all-encompassing, right? It doesn't really make sense to say, well, you don't have an agent that's gonna be able to do everything. No, because it's not there, okay? Maybe, depending on sort of where you sort of think this is going, and I think it's, you know, it's up for debate, right? Depends on how many sci-fi books you read and whatever, right? But maybe these can kill us in like 5 years, or maybe it's fine and it actually, you know, doesn't surpass any sort of level of autonomy, right? But that's where we are. There is no lock-in with any particular vendor at all. Open source is awesome. Llama 3 is, as of today, you know, we hit refresh, maybe next week something else comes out, right? But as of today, that is the best. If you want to, for example, write code, and there are other products. This one is called LangChain. This is what we have built our API and our product on, okay? Because we want to be able to use these language models, but we don't want to be rewriting the code that writes things to the student database constantly, okay? Like we want to write that once and so on. And there are many companies or products, in this case it's an entirely open source product. This one's called LangChain, but there's also Llama Index, a bunch of other libraries that sort of put layers of abstraction around sort of the inference APIs, right? So there are many things. Obviously, I mean, there are many things that can be done, and we can talk about in terms of how to optimize for certain workflows, like managing, for example, the student chat histories and seeing what questions are students having that they're maybe too shy to ask out loud in a class, but you know that the students have those questions because you see that in the chat histories, right? So this stuff could go on for a while, but yeah, sorry for going over a little bit. My email is Miguel@IBLAI, and it'd be great to talk. Yes.
Do you work with anything in terms of overseas, like how high schools in Germany, Spain, and Sweden working with this? How you can actually absorb what you've actually taught them down there or in other companies?
So yeah, so not with Germany specifically, but we work internationally and in Africa as well, and in Asia. In Europe, it's mainly in Spain, right? But what we try to do is basically say, okay, let me show you something else. And this one real quick, right? But there is one problem that a lot of companies and things in this space have, which is they make things into a black box, okay? And we don't really want to do that, right? So instead, we want to just open the kimono up, right? So basically you can edit the prompts, you can edit the data, and you have basically full control, and your pedagogical, knowledge is run by you, okay? And you put that in the prompts. We're not the ones determining that, we're only engineers, okay? Like you clearly know how to teach your students better. Some products, like in this case, this was, Khan Academy, there's a little hit piece in the New York Times, right? But it's not a hit piece, it's fine. But they went to New York public schools, and the teachers were like, well, this is completely a black box. Whenever I want to make any change to how these perform, I have to, contact Khan Academy, and they get back to me in 2-3 business days, and that's ridiculous, right? So what we try to say is, because we want it to work internationally, and we don't want to be responsible for, let's say, those system prompts, because you know how to educate your students better, then we make this platform, we make this agnostic, right? It's agnostic in terms of the subject, we don't really care. It's definitely agnostic in terms of language, also don't really care. And that's how this is sort of deployed across the board. Like we have products in Arabic, for example, with the Saudis, and not even the alignment on the page is the same, but it still works. Oh, yes?
I'm just wondering, when you're thinking about these models, these language models, discussing with each other, is there also consideration of like traditional learning techniques like Bloom's taxonomy? I mean, are you aware of this?
Yeah.
So a lot of what you're talking about seems to skip every single step of that learning process. So I'm wondering, yes, it generates the correct answer.
Yeah.
But a lot of knowledge is generated itself and
Yeah.
happens here in the human brain. So I'm wondering, just posing questions and then having an answer responding to you, how is the student then developing their brains?
So I think this is where you're needed, right? Because this space right now seems to be, and us included, right? But let's say we are engineers, we've jumped on it, right? And we basically build sort of, APIs and all these application layers on top, right? But a lot of sort of that sort of expert pedagogical knowledge, right, is missing from here.
Well, it should be part of the conversation.
No, it should be. So, yeah, it should be. But this is, I think right now, for us, let's say from a knowing our place standpoint, we've basically built a plumbing company, okay? Where we don't claim to say, okay, well, we know how to best teach, right? All the chains of like Bloom's taxonomy and so on, and maybe you have a different interpretation of the two-signal problem than we do. We want to equip you with those tools so then you can have that knowledge being put and conveyed in the prompts, in the system prompts, in the data sources, in the fine-tuning. We are sort of in the camp of the industry where we say, okay, we're engineers, but we need you, right, to sort of build these kinds of things,
Why would we be in the camp of the industry? We should be in the camp of education and then the students.
Fair enough. Okay. So, but here, if you say in terms of skills, let's say I'm speaking for myself, right? It's like I am, an engineer. I think that the output for society at large is better if, let's say, I'm going to build an excellent engineering system that is going to allow you to put, your deep experience, right, of pedagogy and of Bloom's taxonomy and all these other concepts to better educate the students. I want to do that, but from a position of humility, I am better at building the tools that allow you to do that. Say, I can build Microsoft Word, but I cannot write Hamlet, right? So there are some people in this space a little bit who are like, well, I'm gonna do Word and I'm gonna do Hamlet. And then that's where you see things not really working out. And the problem that you explicitly call out from the beginning, right? You have engineers who also think that they're great at, pedagogy, right? Or who are great at other subjects. And I think that is a little bit of a fallacy in this space right now because it's not like the experts went away, right? Like there are people, it's like the medical example, right? Google can build a language model, but Google is not the most excellent, doctors and medical researchers on the planet. So if Google is smart, they will build a tool that can take full advantage, right, of that expert medical research. So I agree with you as a space, as far as the end user is concerned. I think you need great engineering and then the great pedagogy. And if we can, if we come together, that is perfect. But I would not claim that I am better at pedagogy than you are. No, but no, but I'm working together. Basically, if we work together, right, and you say, you put the pedagogy, let's say, or maybe you're also good at the engineering, right? But if everybody sort of specializes on their piece and says, I'm going to give these existing experts a landing pad to a scale, sort of that, then I think the outcomes are a little bit better.
Just to follow, just to finish up.
Yeah.
I just feel like if we put efficiency as the most important outcome, then we're really in danger.
Agreed.
But, yes, there are problems in education, but just coming up with a solution that is better, it's not necessarily going to fix the problems, it might make it worse. If
For
we
sure.
simply embrace technology, then we don't actually know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
If we don't follow traditional methods of reading. If I read Hamlet, then I really understand and I learn something. If I ask a machine to tell me about Hamlet, I'm not really learning.
Okay, absolutely. I fully agree there, right? Because technology, let's say you see the test scores from the beginning of the presentation, they're way lower, right? So clearly that so much technology hasn't helped. I think that has been, so I agree.
The evidence is there.
Yeah.
Right, so why aren't we paying attention to that? What's happened in the last 20 years?
So, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that's why we've sort of taken the position ourselves where we are gonna be building tools for you to be able to, I say you, but basically people who actually understand the pedagogy to be able to deliver that great instruction, right? I think there is a little bit of hubris, right? And sometimes in like the sort of Silicon Valley and software worlds and so on, where just because you're good at like building software, now everyone thinks that you're like a philosopher or you're a genius across these other areas. And I don't think that's really true, right? Things like you're good at building software, you just build software, right? But don't tell me about your like philosophy. For example, this happens across other areas. I think it's more humble and cooler and actually better for the student if we say, okay, you know what is wrong with just the sheer technology, and you know what is missing, okay? We're giving you this, the students are not actually learning. If I say, I'm gonna focus on giving you all the tools to really educate students in a way that is good, instead of me just mandating how I think is best, because I don't know what the best pedagogy to teach someone in 10th grade math is, any more than I know the pedagogy to teach a junior in college physics. I have no idea about any of those. I just build a platform where people who do know that can have all the tools and all the knowledge at their disposal, right, to make that happen. So, I don't know if that's a fair answer, but yeah.
I have a question about equity, and it's really a question of your personal opinion because you're a consultant.
Sure.
And you're doing something that's sort of at the forefront, I would say,
Yeah,
right?
fair.
You showed a map or a calendar that had slots.
Yeah.
So, the writing center at universities, at colleges are sort of remedial. We send students there who need help.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting about this, I think the last question raised it, is the difference between, is an agent really just a very, very, very sophisticated librarian, or is the agent a teacher?
Yeah.
And where this relates to equity is in the question of students that don't have as much as other students who've entered an institution. The institution basically being the physical capital of the teacher and the material capital of the labs, the libraries, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Is the programming, is the engineer capable of bridging the gap between those two and providing not just a tutor who is kind of doing remedial work, but someone who is augmenting the goals of the teachers? Do you see what I'm asking?
Yeah.
Like, do you think that's what your consultancy is going to be capable of doing in the long run?
Well, I think right now we are constrained by, let's say, the compute and the reasoning power of the best LLM that's available right now.
But it's all open source.
Well, so the absolute best stuff out there right now is not open source. That's OpenAI, right? So what's open source? Basically, open source is maybe like 4 months behind. I don't know. It depends on who you talk to, right? But maybe open source, Llama 3, the 70 billion parameter, right? Maybe it's now sort of at that little level. But okay, is it going to be related to that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Well,
And then I'll answer both.
on one hand, this is kind of exciting because as an educator and administrator, I can see lots of potential uses. But as educators in an urban public institution that receives a tremendous amount of public funding to do innovative things, who primarily serve underserved students.
Yeah.
We see the impact of technology, both the promise and the deficits. And I think the gestalt is that we see these tools, and you're threading a fine line between the teacher and the librarian, but we're a bit cynical.
Yeah.
Because we know that efficiency tools tend historically to be forced upon us, and this, at the end of the day, is probably easier sold as an efficiency tool than it is a tool of authentic learning. So we envision a situation where elite institutions will always have elite access to elite ideas from elite minds, whereas our students who come from primarily impoverished backgrounds, statistically, will be trained by an AI.
Okay, so I think that's fair. My context window for answering the questions is not that high. So maybe But
You have 12 tokens.
oh, okay, all right. Okay, so I would say so. First, for that, the first question is there seems to be, I think, a little bit of an illusion in that we can either say the choice that that we can pose the question as AI or no AI. I think we are past that, right? Because it runs on ChatGPT, right? There's a meme. It's probably a little bit of a joke, but there's some truth in it. You know, students are using ChatGPT to answer things that the instructors are using ChatGPT to generate. So what's going on, right? So I think right now, if ChatGPT and all this stuff is prevalent, I think by the way that's bad, right? But if ChatGPT and all these kinds of things are already prevalent, it's already being used, right? You look at the stock price of of Czech, for example, and a bunch of other things, like it's clearly happening. Then what we can do as organizations is say, okay, if it's going to be a choice between ChatGPT AI or AI that I can control, right? Because maybe all of your agents respond only with the information from your lectures, right? So if you say, okay, the choice is not AI or no AI, right? AI is already here. So then it's AI that I don't control versus AI that I do control. Then you say, okay, so if it's going to be AI that I do control, how can I control it more, right? And this is where you say, okay, well, I'm going to just require it to only answer with information that I have put, and I'm going to tell the students, look, you can go on ChatGPT and it'll make up some stuff, or you can look at this agent I've trained with the knowledge that is in your lecture notes, right? You have that control. Or you could say, okay, well, for a student from, let's say, from an accessibility and an equity standpoint, sometimes it's a lot more convenient to just say, instead of, hey, here's a textbook, right, or here's a long lecture, well, if you have a question about something, maybe you don't have to spend 15 minutes looking for this information in the index, which we're going to do that, right? Or if it's a lecture note, maybe fine-grained search helps because otherwise the video is very long and you're not going to do that either. So this allows you to have a chat interface over that. I don't know, I mean,
It doesn't help. The hard work is where you learn. You don't just, you just cut corners. To gather information is part of the learning process.
so would you say the hard work is in me finding the topic in the index, or in once I have found the index, that's when the hard work starts? Where do we want to allocate the hard work? Because if it's the first one, then I would argue that Google did the same thing to hardware, let's say books, right? So if you want the learner to spend time sort of seeking that information, right, or seeking an access to a tutor from 4 to 5 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and other sort of barriers, there is not. You could talk about the motivation, but that's another question. But the student is not learning by just having harder access. I think we want the student to learn the actual content, right?
Yes, sorry, I feel like I'm monopolizing.
No, this is awesome. Okay, yeah, sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah.
So, I want to address a couple of things. You mentioned agent thinking about a super big thing that can do everything, right? So just to make sure.
Oh yeah, sorry.
An agent is just a metaphor of something that we use to provide an artifact computing, right? So it can be something that turns on a light bulb or something like that to something very complex, right? So agents are used to englobe some functionality, right? So it can be something very simple or very, very complicated. Then the next aspect is about education, right? So we were talking about pedagogy, and you mentioned that we don't know what is best for learning math on 4th grade, right? The truth is like there is not everything one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
So we know that there is different types of learning, right? And that goes to the first comment, right? So the Bloom taxonomy, right?
Yeah.
I think we have those tools.
Yeah.
What we can do is design tasks, learning experience for our students for these different levels, right? So I'm introducing, let's say, computer programming, right? So the first step, I have to do a task that is knowledge. I have to provide just students have to understand main concepts, right?
Yeah.
Then my next task as an educator is I have to use this AI to develop an learning experience where they are going to develop this skill, they are going to apply this skill, right? That's the next level. And then I have to develop perhaps something around this that help us develop a final project where they are going to apply and master those skills, right? So it's as you said, it's the collaboration between the tools that we have, but also the experience we have and the way we use it, right? So far, there is nothing that covers everything. but we have to start, thinking of how we model the learning experience that we know that can work for the student, right?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And you about that, there is if what we are constrained by right now in terms of the reasoning ability of these agents is the size of the language model, and we've seen the exponential improvement with just 1 year, then it makes sense to consider not what GPT-4 can do, right, but what can GPT-5 and GPT-6 and so on can, right? Because oh yeah, so I think you had first, and then yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking, of course, in metaphors because I teach English, and I'm thinking about a great chef who trains their sous chefs to do the prep, right? And that doesn't take away, because he didn't chop the onions doesn't make him less of a chef, right? So to me, this idea of a vehicle, which is what you create, is really cool because I can tell the agent, this is the material from which I want you to provide to the students, and these are the type of questions they usually ask.
Yeah.
Now that's the kind of thing that, it's gonna change for me for every class. And I like the ability to say, they're gonna be out there Googling, they Google everything. They chat GPT, ask a question. This way, I'm teaching them how to manage and be literate in a wild west of internet, right? So I don't see it as anything but a tool that we have to be careful with. But you're talking about generative instead of like adversarial or something.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably use it for adversary. And yeah, okay, so also for way over, yeah.
So, first, thank you for using the term hubris.
Oh.
You use it in a self-deprecating way, but there's a lot of hubris in this room as well, right? So bear that in mind. We're very good at playing a passive-aggressive argument in favor of the minimalist approach.
Keeps it exciting.
So, and we're not beating the topic to it like a dead horse, right? This idea of using a tool, you mentioned, well, Google sort of did that. When I heard the concept of, it's finding the information that teaches, I thought, well, we shouldn't use books then. Go find the person who wrote the book, right? But we're so accustomed to books, we don't see it that way.
Fair enough.
And so, I want to just thank you for
No, that's, yeah. We have some professors who are, this one, for example, from the George Washington University, who says, okay, I'm tired, actually no, I'm gonna make her sound mean, this is not the case at all, right? But she said, I want a chat interface over all of my lecture notes so I can provide one-to-one instruction for my students in the manner that I would have said it. Okay, so I'm just gonna feed all my notes, everything that I've ever taught, I'm gonna feed this to this model, and anybody can chat with it, right? Is she getting replaced? Actually, no, like her popularity is growing, but yeah, okay, I'll. This was, thank you so much.